Hello. Adib, how are you?
Hey, Andres. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. It's very good to be on screen. And I think we're live. I think we're ready to go. So,
Yeah, I think so too.
great. Well, by introduction, my name is Andres Roberts. I'm the founder of something we call the BioLeadership Project. And the BioLeadership Project is a community. It's a movement of people around the world saying that a better form of leadership is possible by working with nature. We set it up 5-6 years ago. I've been working with leadership and nature for a long time, but it feels like something amazing is now growing in the world where it's no longer crazy or hippie or wacky to say, let's do it with nature to care for life. There is an amazing movement growing in the world. And we'd love to share some of the context and some of the stories that we're seeing happen. Adib, I'll let you do a little introduction.
Yeah, so I'm Adib Dada. I'm the founder at theOtherDada, which is a regenerative consulting and architecture firm. I am trained as an environmental architect, and my work at the moment basically goes in between building habitat for humans through architecture, as well as building habitat for other organisms through restoring forests in urban areas.
Nice. Okay. Well, folks, so what we're thinking is I'm going to do a little bit of context to just share sort of 6-7 minutes, maybe of a frame that we think is helpful in the context of what does a different form of leadership look like and how would nature do leadership, basically. Then we're going to invite Adib to share a little bit of a story of what his work looks like. And maybe we have a bit of a moment for a conversation just around, well, what have we learned in our work? Trying to build a new culture of leadership that cares for all people and all of life in the world. I'm going to try and share screen. Give me a moment. I'm really hopeful that this works. Window. I can't see it yet. Where's the screen? All right, okay. Let me see if I can do this. Slides. Forgive me, I'm just going to try and get this presentation up on.
So maybe, Andres, while you're doing that, I can kind of say that I joined By Leadership as a fellow about 3 years ago, so as part of their first cohort. And it's been definitely like a life-changing experience. I mean, I'd already been exploring these issues through my work as having studied biomimicry, but I was looking at it more from a from the work perspective and the architecture perspective. And then by joining By Leadership, it was really about integrating the way that we do business with the way that we are actually designing inspired by nature.
Great. Thanks, Adib. Okay, so just to run through. So it feels like the world is calling for a different way of doing things. You know, when we look to the science, when we look to our systems, we know things are at a very fragile moment. And whatever we call leadership, whatever we call human progress, it feels like we need to somehow change the rules so that it cares for what we want to sustain life and what we value the most. We need a different leadership mindset that works with nature. To say a little bit about my backstory and the story of the BioLeadership, I've been taking people into nature as part of learning processes for a long time, doing things like this, taking people out into nature, not to conquer, not to achieve big expeditions, but to listen, to stop and to notice and listen. I had the joy of hosting Adib last year in Scotland. It's a process of slowing down. It's a process of stepping away from the busyness of everyday life. It's a process of letting go of the thinking. And all of a sudden, when we give ourselves a little bit of room to notice nature out in the world, but also our own inner nature, a different kind of insight and a different kind of knowledge seems to emerge. And when I see people, sometimes we leave them for 3 hours or 4 hours, sometimes for 3 days or 4 days. And it's amazing when I see people after they've come back, their eyes are brighter, they feel more centered, they have a better sense of perspective of what's important in their lives, they feel more well. But at the same time, there is a recognition that comes up that the way that we have created human systems, our structures, our cities, our businesses, our governments, they work in a very different way to how healthy natural systems work. And that's become the essence of the work that we do, trying to understand how would we develop alternative structures that work more like healthy natural systems. And I would push that further. I would say that the dominant model of leadership, the dominant model of progress, of human progress, is actually a root cause to a lot of the things that we're trying to put right in the world. So I'd like to explore that just for a few minutes and then hand over to Adib. So to begin with, we believe through the BioLeadership Project, and there are lots of references to this, that the dominant mindset of progress is hooked on maximization, on make it bigger, make it go further, do it faster, more is a rule set of leadership. And don't worry about the detail in this slide, but I do want to show a pattern, and that is that everything on the left-hand side, every table on the left-hand side represents the rate of change in human-led activity. So I know there's, as I say, don't worry about the detail, but in here we have things like world population, real gross domestic product, the production of paper, the construction of dams. And every one of these tables has a little red blur. That's the year 1950. So it's time, it starts in the 1750, it comes up to 2010, and you might just see that there's a little red shape or a blur. That's the year 1950. And it goes to show everything we do as human beings has rapidly increased since the year 1950. I'm imagining many of us, have been born in that time. So all we have known in our lives is do more, make it bigger, make it faster, etc., etc. And everything on the right-hand side in those green boxes represents an Earth system. And all of our action to go bigger, to make it faster, to go larger, is affecting not just carbon in the atmosphere, therefore climate change, but the acidification of the oceans, the capture of marine life, the loss of tropical forests, and so on and so on. So this is a conference on sustainability, but I also want to ask a question beneath that, which is, what is the driving principle that is leading to the loss of these Earth systems? And maximization is one of them. So then you can say also another dominant aspect of the dominant model, or another dominant aspect of the dominant mindset, leadership mindset, is seeing the world as something that we control. Like we're attached to this notion that we are in control. The world is something that is there to exploit, and that we create these mechanical systems to exploit it. The roots of some of this go back to the scientific enlightenment. Scientists like Descartes and philosophers like Francis Bacon, all of a sudden saying we have the maths, so we are superior, but we can measure the universe, so we're superior to the universe. And that mindset is at the heart of so much of what we might see as development and leadership. Some of you may know this phrase, VUCA. VUCA stands for the fact that we are increasingly in a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a very, very difficult terrain, and it's increasingly becoming more difficult. And we only have to think about some of the climate effects. I'm thinking about Libya at the moment, and of course, you've experienced sorts of situations in Turkey. Like this is all real systemic change that is present and increasing in our day-to-day lives, and a mindset of control where we see the world as something to exploit with very hard mechanical structures is not fit for purpose for navigating a VUCA world. It's just too slow. It's too brittle, and in fact, it's causing some of the problems that we're facing. I interviewed somebody as part of a big program around responsible finance, and somebody who was very, very senior in the financial sector here in the UK said, I'm supposed to have influence, but I feel powerless to make things better. Like, we can't rely on the idea that we're in control. And then another aspect of the dominant mindset, I would say, is this sense of disconnection, that deep within ourselves, we've all of a sudden, in the dominant paradigm around the world, come to a belief that we're separate to each other, we're separate to nature. Maybe we're not even fully connected to all of the different parts of what makes us human. It's a big topic of conversation, but maybe there's something there. Maybe we've separated ourselves out. So nature does not work like that. Nature works not through maximization, but optimization. There's a beautiful story of wolves being reintroduced into Yellowstone Park in the US, like a top predator. But by bringing back wolves, many more species came back into the ecosystem. The wolves made the deers go up into the hills. That meant that more trees could plant their roots and grow. That brought back more birds. That brought back more species. So I'm saying this very, very quickly, but whenever we try to maximize part of nature, it brings the whole system crashing down. Nature works through optimization, which means the different parts are in a relationship that's competitive, but it keeps the parts in a healthy shape, and it keeps the whole in a healthy shape. So it's about optimization, not maximization. And of course, in nature, we don't see hierarchies of control. We don't see a centralized head office. We see webs of relationship where communication is happening in many ways across many dimensions. We see circularity, not just straight lines, and we see continuous exchange. So the way that information, the way that movement happens in living systems is very different to hierarchy and control. And last, of course, when you really look into nature, you notice that everything is constantly interconnected and co-creating. It exists because the different parts are helping it exist. And we've come very, very, very far away from that understanding in our day-to-day being. I promise you this will be the last sort of slide I share for now. So what we believe is useful as a backdrop to exploring how can we support a new form of leadership that works with nature is just this table, really, and a question: are we moving from a world of maximization to optimization? Are we moving a world from top-down control to one that works more as living systems and networks? Are we moving away from linear thinking and planning and consumption to circular forms of structure and organization? Are we moving from short-term gains to longer perspectives? Are we moving from extractive to regenerative? Maybe are we moving away from a world where we see as disconnection to one where we start to work more as wholes? Okay, I'm gonna pause there. I'm gonna see if I can work out how to stop sharing and hand over to Adib. Adib, as he said before, is a fellow. He's part of the work that we are doing with the BioLeadership Project. For me, he's one of my heroes. I think what he's doing to bring nature into the city of Lebanon and rewild, urban environments is so inspiring. So Adib, over to you.
Thank you, Andres.
I'm not quite sure how to take my screen off. I think if you share yours, yeah, that's great. That looks like it's coming up. Yeah.
Can you see my screen? Andres, does
we can see it,
slides?
yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. So, I mean, as I've said before, I'm the founder of a architecture consulting and forest making company based in Beirut, Lebanon. And the challenge that we've been looking into is that all of these challenges that we're looking at are interconnected. So how do we address the crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, as well as human rights abuses? And for me, it's about, and the reason why I joined BioLeadership, it's about really understanding our place within nature. So moving from ego, from this kind of like pyramidal model with man at the top, to an ecosystem worldview, where humans and other organisms are all equal and equally important and have equal things to share and offer. And moving beyond sustainability into this idea of regeneration. So moving beyond transitioning from the economic model, where society and ecology are at the service of economy, into an ecological perspective, where economy is just a tool for society to live well within the ecological boundaries. And for me, in terms of our architecture work, it's, what if our buildings were safe and regenerative? Buildings that are free from toxic chemicals and that are actually beneficial to the surrounding communities, human and non-human, considering the whole life cycle of a project, functionality, quality, and the experience of its users. So this takes us into kind of the architecture work that we do. And this is an example in Saudi Arabia, in the city of Riyadh, where the architecture is really blending the use of hyper-local materials, so the use of localized Riyadh stone and stone that were dug up from the excavation of the project, to using native and indigenous landscaping. Also providing for humans as well as other organisms in terms of having non-chemical, in this case, swimming pools and other water bodies that are not only beneficial to humans, free from chemicals, but also are an act of generosity towards other organisms that will come in and drink from this water without getting poisoned. And at the city scale, the question is, what if our cities were as effective and generous as a forest, providing not only for ourselves as humans, but for other species as well, and in perfect balance with the operating conditions of planet Earth? So with this work, when we started looking at the urban scale, we moved kind of away from building habitat for humans only to building habitat for other organisms. And we started taking over these degraded lands. So in this picture, you can see at the top is the Beirut River. And the Beirut River is used to be a healthy ecosystem, and that was transformed into a sewage infrastructure back in 1968. So you can see it at the top of the picture here. It's a concrete canal, and the only water that flows through it in summer is raw sewage from different towns and villages upstream. The land that you're looking at was an informal landfill. And so what we did is actually reclaim this landfill, clean it up with the help of the community, and then reforest it using the Miyawaki method. And by inviting also, all members of the community to take part of the reforestation. And the afforestation work we do is solely based on the native species. So again, being hyper-local, understanding our bioregion that we are living in. So in our case, we have different types of oak trees and pine trees, strawberry trees, laurel, sage, and so on and so forth. And we're really recreating the ecosystem from the bottom up. So from the underground, recreating the soil, bringing health back to the soil, as the soil is needed to be able to support the life of the vegetation above ground. And then in the vegetation, understanding that the forest is not just made up of single trees, but it's actually an ecosystem of herbs and shrubs and small trees and large trees. And this is the kind of thinking that we bring back into our organization, as well as into our architectural projects. And here you can see a picture kind of like 2 years apart, going from bare dead land into a thriving forest ecosystem in just 2 years' time. And in this picture, you can see the river in the winter, which is a mixture of rainwater and sewage. But then on the on the left side, you can see the forest, which is now 4 years old and which is now self-sufficient. So it no longer requires any maintenance on our part, and it no longer requires any watering. And then on the right side, you can see us in the process of planting a new forest. So you can see just in 4 years' time, how this kind of like brown, dead degraded lands transform into healthy forest ecosystems. We've done forests all over the country, up in mountain villages where it snows. So this is ski forest, as well as in highly urban areas where we're actually ripping out the asphalt and the concrete and replacing those with forests. And in the aftermath of the Beirut explosion of 2020, we actually planted a living memorial in the memory of the victims of the blast. And we actually planted the name of each victim along with each tree sapling into the ground. So the forests here are then used also as a healing device and as healing spaces. And the idea is, instead of having a memorial that is fixed in time and that is fixed in terms of emotion, of sadness and grief, this memorial is about celebrating life and rebirth and renewal. And we also worked with schools that were affected by the blast. So the school was heavily damaged. And what we did is that we came in with machinery. We took out the concrete from the parking lot of the school. We took just the space of one single car and replaced it with a forest. And this is it. In just 10 months, we went from tiny saplings to a full-fledged forest. And this is with the help of the students of the schools themselves. So doing a lot of kind of engagement with the students in terms of teaching them about the native ecology, about the importance of taking care of the local plants, but also the fact that they have the ability and the agency to be able to take concrete away and replace it with healthy ecosystems. And this is it. Just a year and a half later, plants have grown from 10 centimeters to the largest tree here is about 4.5 meters high. So our work with the Other Forest is basically, it's a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration in cities. And the idea is that by implementing urban afforestation, we can regenerate degraded leftover lands into a shared space between humans, native fauna and flora, all the while tackling urban flooding, reducing pollution, and the urban heat island effect. Essentially, we're working with nature to transition our cities to healthy and resilient communities. Reclaiming degraded land as public space, regenerating ecological systems, and regenerating social connections. So in the past 3.5 years, we've planted more than 10 forests, more than 10,000 trees and shrubs of 26 different native species, and engaged more than 800 volunteers. So together we can tackle the biodiversity loss and the climate crises by working with nature to transition our cities into shared spaces for humans and other life to thrive. So I think, Andres, we can go back to a discussion mode.
Great, let's do that. Adib, I could listen to you talk about and watch pictures, look at pictures of your projects forever. I think we just have a minute or two left, actually, or a couple of moments. So why don't we do a little bit of just, I'd love to ask you, as someone bringing this kind of leadership to the world, what have you learned? What has felt important to you, or what have been some of your biggest lessons?
I mean, basically, I started as an activist, fighting for the Beirut River. And I was just kind of like a vocal, angry activist, down on the ground, trying to get people to come to the river and to understand these, how they had transformed it into this kind of like sewage infrastructure. And basically people did not really click with this. And it took me about 6 years to understand that I needed to do something very tangible, and that wasn't directly confronting the issue. And so when we had this idea come up, a friend suggested it, of restoring this forest ecosystem next to the river. It was no longer about the river and the problems of the river. It was, hey, how about, you come and plant with us, because we are, greening this part of the city and turning it into public space. And then as people would come into the space, they are discovering the river, they are discovering the challenges on their own, they are smelling they're getting the smell of sewage, and they are then asking questions, they are becoming curious. So it's a much more powerful way to engage people, instead of just kind of, because we're bombarded by all of these negative news all of the time. And so in here, they feel like they're actually doing something positive, and then they discover some other challenge along the way, and they start getting curious about how they could be a force of positive change.
I love that. I love that. I actually have one last slide, which I'll share it, and I'll just say it. But for me, there's something about authentically working with nature is about also understanding systems, connection, how change happens, and resilience. And that's the thing that we've forgotten so much of. And I think we're at the moment that we're out of time. But that would be my one big learning, really, that we have lots of ways of knowing. And for a long time, leadership has been in the head. But actually working with nature and working like nature is about coming back to the body, to feeling, to experience, and also the heart. And only nature can teach us those things. So folks, I hope this has been interesting and helpful. It's time for us to sign off, but wishing you a really good conference, and maybe we'll cross paths again.